What happened when an undercover CEO walked into his own factory and caught an employee breaking the rules? Well, it didn't go the way anyone expected. Welcome back, brilliant viewers. Today's story takes a surprising turn, from confrontation to compassion, from punishment to possibility. When the CEO discovered the truth behind one late-night phone call, everything changed, not just for one young worker, but for the future of the entire company. If you believe that real leadership means listening, lifting others up, and turning empathy into action, then stay tuned. You're about to witness a story that's as moving as it is inspiring. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Darren Cole pushed open the glass door to Quick Card Express, the bell chiming his entrance. Dressed in a plain navy uniform with a generic name tag that read Eric, he looked like any other part-timer starting a late-night shift. In reality, Darren was the CEO of the entire Quick Cart chain, a man who had built the business from a single neighborhood store to over 300 locations nationwide. But success had come with distance, and lately that distance felt dangerous. Reports of employee dissatisfaction, staff turnover, and poor customer experience had started piling up. Darren didn't want filtered updates from regional managers anymore. He wanted the truth. So he did what few CEOs would ever dare to do. He went undercover. It wasn't his first time, but this visit had a different weight. The complaints from this Chicago branch were particularly troubling. Missing inventory, customer complaints, even rumors of staff taking advantage of night shifts to break policy. So here he was, stepping into the trenches, hoping to see what corporate memos never revealed. The store was quiet, the aisles clean but dimly lit, shelves half-stocked. A teenage cashier glanced up from the counter but didn't say much, just a nod. Darren nodded back, clocked in at the back terminal and began stacking shelves, watching, listening, blending in. He hadn't been there more than an hour when something off caught his attention, a hushed voice, urgent, too emotional for customer service. He followed the sound, heart already tightening. A young employee was on the phone behind a rack of paper towels, his back turned, his voice shaking. Darren couldn't hear the full conversation, but what he caught, "Don't do anything stupid, just stay on the line," was enough to stop him cold. In that moment, the mission changed. He had come looking for slackers, rule breakers, maybe someone to fire, but now he might have just found someone barely hanging on. Darren found him near the storage racks, crouched low with his back to the security camera, one hand cupped over his phone, the other gripping his knee. His name tag read Luis, barely clinging to his red Quick Cart vest. He looked young, maybe early 20s, with hollow cheeks and worry etched deep into his brow. Darren stood silently for a few seconds, listening to fragments of the hushed conversation. "Please don't hang up. I'll be home soon, okay?" There was panic in Lewis's voice, the kind that didn't belong in a routine customer service job. Darren cleared his throat. Louise flinched, quickly ending the call. "I'm going to need you in the break room now," Darren said flatly, keeping his Eric the new guy persona firmly in place as they made their way to the back. Once inside the windowless room, Darren dropped the act. "I'm not just another trainee. I'm Darren Cole. I own this company." Luis froze, color draining from his face. "You were breaking policy. Private calls during shift hours are not allowed. So you've got 30 seconds. Tell me why I shouldn't fire you right now." Luis looked ready to either bolt or break. His lips parted, then closed again. Finally, with a slow breath, he spoke. "It was my little sister. She's 15. We lost our mom last year, and it's just us now." His voice cracked. "Tonight, she called me crying. Said she didn't want to be alone anymore, said she..." "Didn't see the point." Luis looked down at the table, blinking fast. "I know I broke the rules, but I wasn't just talking to a friend, I was keeping her alive." Darren felt the air shift, the judgment in his chest faltering. This wasn't laziness or entitlement. This was a kid shouldering a crisis alone. He had expected an excuse, maybe defiance, but what he found was raw responsibility, and a cry for help disguised as a policy violation. Darren sat back, his entire approach crumbling in the face of reality. Luis wasn't the problem. The system that left kids like him defend for themselves was. And just like that, Darren knew this night wasn't about enforcing rules. It was about rewriting them. Darren leaned forward, elbows on the table, watching as Luis wrestled with whether to say more. There was a weariness in the boy's eyes that went far beyond the night shift grind. "Tell me about her," Darren said gently. Luis hesitated, then nodded. "Her name's Mariella. She just started high school. She's smart, loves photography. But ever since our mom passed, she's changed. She hardly eats, she skips classes, she stopped talking to her friends. I try to be there, but I work 2 jobs. Here and night security at a warehouse. I leave before she wakes up and get home when she's asleep." His voice faltered, and he looked away, ashamed. "We used to have an aunt, but she lives out of state and couldn't take us in. We didn't want to go into the system, so I filed for guardianship. I'm only 22. I had no idea what I was doing." Luis shook his head, fingers tugging at a frayed thread on his vest. "I thought if I just worked hard enough we'd be okay, but lately, she's been slipping. Tonight she called crying, saying she couldn't handle it anymore. Said she felt invisible." Darren's throat tightened. The call that had almost gotten Luis fired had been a lifeline, not just for Mariella, but for Luis, too. He was doing everything in his power to keep them afloat, but the cracks were beginning to show. "Have you looked into support programs, counseling for her, or even for you?" Darren asked. Luis laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. "We don't have insurance. Most places turned us away or had waiting lists months long. I tried once. They wanted $300 just for the first session." Silence hung between them, thick and heavy. Darren had built a company designed for efficiency, for margins and metrics, but in that moment, face to face with a young man doing the impossible with no safety net, the numbers felt irrelevant. Luis wasn't lazy, he wasn't careless, he was breaking under the weight of responsibility no one his age should have to carry. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," Darren finally said. Luis met his eyes, startled by the empathy in his voice. "You're not fired, but we're going to fix this, together." For the first time, Luis's shoulders relaxed, if only slightly. And in that flicker of relief, Darren saw the truth. Leadership wasn't just about holding people accountable. It was about holding them up when no one else would. Darren leaned back in his chair, silent, letting the weight of Luis's story settle between them. Just hours ago, he'd walked into the office, expecting to find weak links, inefficiencies, maybe even slackers to let go. Instead, he found Luis, a young man burning the candle at both ends, not for luxury or leisure, but to keep his family from falling apart. The rules said this was a fireable offense. Company policy didn't make exceptions for personal emergencies. But Darren hadn't built his business to be cold. He had built it to matter. And this mattered. "I should let you go," Darren said, his voice low but steady. Luis's head dropped slightly, as if bracing for the inevitable. "But I won't." That made Luis glance up, surprise flickering behind his tired eyes. "You don't deserve punishment, Luis. You deserve help." Darren stood, crossed the room and grabbed a folder from the cabinet. He slid it across the table. "Starting tomorrow, you're transferring to day shift, same pay, and I'm giving you 3 paid days off, no questions asked. You need time to regroup, and your sister needs you now more than ever." Luis stared at the folder like it might disappear. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Darren replied, a soft smile breaking through his normally composed exterior. "Just take care of her. And yourself." He paused. "Also, HR is putting together a list of free and subsidized mental health services. I've asked them to prioritize cases like yours. You'll get a call before your next shift." Luis blinked hard, fighting emotion. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone should have done it for me once," Darren said, "and because this company can't run on policy alone. It needs heart." In that quiet, windowless room, surrounded by the dull buzz of late-night work and fluorescent lights, something shifted. Compassion wasn't just a gesture. It was a decision. Darren could have enforced the rules and walked away justified, but instead, he chose to lead with empathy, and in doing so, he gave Luis more than just a second chance. He gave him hope, and sometimes, hope is the most powerful tool a leader can offer. The following morning, the office was still groggy with the haze of early dawn when Luis stepped into Darren's corner office. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, and sunlight filtered in through half-drawn blinds. Luis looked different today, still tired, but there was a new steadiness in his posture, a subtle shift in how he carried himself. Darren gestured toward the seat across from him, and Luis sat down, hands resting nervously in his lap. "I meant what I said last night," Darren began, "and now that you've had a few hours to breathe, I want to talk about what comes next." Luis gave a hesitant nod, clearly unsure where this was going. Darren leaned forward, folding his hands. "You've been here nearly 2 years. You've shown up on time, taken on double shifts, and handled some of our worst customer escalations with more patience than half the management team. That tells me you've got potential, and it's time we stop ignoring that." Luis blinked. "Sir, I appreciate that, but I don't know if I'm ready for anything more." "No one ever is," Darren replied with a smile. "That's why I'm not throwing you into the deep end. I'm offering you a promotion to team lead, better pay, flexible scheduling, and mentorship directly from me. We'll work around your responsibilities at home, because your situation isn't a weakness, it's proof of strength." Luis sat back, stunned. "Team lead? I thought I was barely holding it together." "You were," Darren said, "and you still showed up. That's leadership, under pressure, with compassion." He slid a printed outline across the desk. "This program will give you the training you need to grow professionally and personally. You'll shadow department meetings, learn conflict resolution, even give feedback on our internal support programs." Luis hesitated. "You really think I can do this?" "I know you can," Darren replied firmly. "And it's not just about you. We've got dozens of people on this floor balancing more than anyone knows. If you step up, you'll be an example, proof that the company values grit, not just resumes." There was a long pause, then Luis nodded. "Okay, I'm in." "Good," Darren said, standing to shake his hand. "Let's build something better, together." That morning, a promotion wasn't just handed out, it was earned, and it marked the beginning of a culture shift, where second chances weren't rare, they were the foundation of something greater. Later that week, Darren called Luis back into his office, not for feedback on his new team lead duties, but for something far more personal. "Tell me more about your brother," Darren said, cutting straight to the point. Luis looked up, surprised. "Mateo?" Darren nodded. "You mentioned he's been struggling. I want to know what we can do to help, not just you, but him." Luis hesitated, then slowly opened up. Mateo was 17, a quiet kid who had once loved drawing and music but had become withdrawn over the past year. Since their mother passed, Luis had done everything he could to keep them afloat: food, bills, school. But emotional support was harder when he was always working. "He's smart," Luis said, "but lately he's been skipping class, saying things like, 'College isn't for people like us.'" Darren leaned back, brows furrowed. "Has anyone ever talked to him about scholarships, mentorships?" Luis shook his head. "We never had time for that kind of stuff, just survival." Darren nodded slowly. "Then let's change that." The next day, Darren had HR assemble a resource package for Mateo: college counseling, free mental health support, and a list of community programs for students in high-stress households. But he didn't stop there. Darren personally called a contact at a local youth arts nonprofit and arranged for Mateo to join their after-school creative mentorship program. "Give him an outlet," Darren told Luis, "something that isn't just about surviving." Luis was stunned. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let him try," Darren replied. "Let him see there's more out there." By the end of the week, Mateo had met with a guidance counselor, joined his first art session, and started showing signs of the teenager he used to be, quiet, yes, but engaged again. Luis came into work with a tired smile but a lighter heart. For the first time in years, he felt like they were more than just holding on. Darren had promised support and delivered, not through handouts, but with belief. In that belief, a struggling brother found space to grow, and a company proved that investing in employees sometimes meant looking beyond the desk and straight into their lives. Luis's promotion to team lead didn't come with instant applause. In fact, his first few days in the new role were met with skepticism. Some of his coworkers, people who'd once shared late-night shifts and swapped jokes over vending machine coffee, now eyed him with guarded glances. Whispers spread. Why him? Was it a favor, just a sympathy move from upper management? Luis heard it all, but he didn't react. Instead, he showed up earlier than everyone else, stayed later, and worked harder than ever before, not out of pride, but out of purpose. When one of the agents on his team struggled with a difficult customer call, Luis didn't bark orders or criticize. He pulled up a chair, reviewed the call recording together, and calmly explained how to handle similar situations. Another day, he stayed behind with a newer employee who had missed quota and walked them through strategy. Patient, clear, and unshaken. Slowly, the team began to notice, not because Luis demanded respect, but because he earned it. It wasn't just his leadership that stood out, it was his humility. Luis didn't forget where he came from. He still grabbed coffee with the overnight crew, he still answered the same calls when queues backed up, and he always took time to ask how people were really doing. His story, once seen as a weakness, started becoming a quiet inspiration. By the end of the month, the whispers had faded. The same coworkers who had doubted him were now coming to him for guidance. Luis didn't just survive the transition, he transformed the team, not with authority, but with empathy. And in doing so, he redefined what leadership looked like. Not a title, not a corner office, but someone willing to walk through the fire and still turn around to help others out of it. For Darren Reyes, the CEO who had slipped into his own logistics company under the radar, the plan had been simple: observe, assess, fix. But after meeting Luis, the plan shifted. Because what he found wasn't just a broken policy or poor performance. He found a story, a life, a reality far too common and far too overlooked. Darren had spent years looking at spreadsheets, KPIs, and executive dashboards, believing they told the full story, but those numbers didn't show sleepless nights, sacrificed dreams, or phone calls between brothers that carried the weight of survival. They didn't show Luis's steady voice when a coworker broke down, or the quiet leadership that had transformed an uncertain team into a confident unit. It became clear to Darren that leadership couldn't remain in glass offices. If he truly wanted to run a company that valued people, he had to start by rebuilding the culture from the floor up. In a meeting with the executive team, he didn't talk about quarterly profits. Instead, he told Luis's story, without names at first. He spoke about invisible burdens and how policies must account for humanity. He demanded the creation of a flexible emergency support program, increased access to counseling services, and a mentorship pipeline that reached entry-level roles. And when he revealed that Luis, the young man they had once marked as replaceable, had become the catalyst for this shift, there was silence, then nods. Something in the room had changed. The leadership team saw what Darren had come to believe. People weren't just resources, they were the reason the company existed at all. Darren knew he couldn't fix every injustice overnight, but he could listen, he could show up, and he could make sure that the next Luis didn't have to fight alone. What had started as an undercover experiment had turned into a personal awakening. Darren didn't just leave the warehouse with insights, he left with purpose. Because real leadership wasn't about watching from above. It was about stepping into the chaos, finding the people worth believing in, and clearing the path so they could rise. Weeks turned into months, and what began as a quiet intervention in a dim break room grew into something far greater, a ripple that reached across departments, lives, and mindsets. Luis, once an anonymous voice on the warehouse floor, had become a symbol of resilience. He hadn't just earned a promotion, he had sparked a cultural shift. The support he received helped stabilize his brother Mateo's life, and the resources Darren arranged allowed Mateo to finish high school strong, with a college advisor guiding him toward real opportunities. But the impact didn't stop there. Inspired by Luis's journey, other employees began to speak up about burnout, about financial pressure, about dreams long deferred. For the first time, the company had created a space where vulnerability wasn't seen as weakness, but as a starting point for support. Darren launched a mentorship program aimed at identifying potential in overlooked places. Stalkers, cleaners, drivers, people who had long carried the weight of the business without recognition. He also introduced flexible scheduling trials, scholarships for employees' family members, and monthly anonymous check-ins to ensure voices weren't just heard, but acted upon. Luis flourished in his new leadership role, not because it came easy, but because he led from lived experience. When he spoke in meetings, people listened, not to his title, but to the authenticity in his words. He was the first to arrive, the last to leave, and never forgot the shift that changed everything. He often checked in with new hires, looking for signs of silent struggle, offering quiet support the way Darren had offered it to him. And Darren? He had stopped seeing his company as a machine of moving parts. It was now a network of people, each one a story, a heartbeat, a hope. He kept Luis's story close, not as a one-time anecdote, but as a reminder that leadership is about more than policies. It's about presence. What happened that night in the break room was small, but the echo of it, the simple act of listening, believing, helping, would carry through generations. One conversation, one decision had set off a ripple, and that ripple was turning into a wave. The story of Luis and Darren teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, empathy, and the unseen struggles that many employees carry. At first glance, Luis's late-night phone call appeared to be a simple breach of company policy, one that could have ended his job. But Darren, the CEO in disguise, chose to listen rather than react. What he uncovered was a story of responsibility, sacrifice, and quiet resilience. Luis wasn't just a worker, he was a guardian, a lifeline for his younger brother Mateo. This story reminds us that rules matter, but so does context. True leadership isn't about discipline alone, it's about understanding the lives behind the uniforms and the headsets. When leaders choose compassion over assumption, they unlock potential that policies alone can't reach. Darren's decision to help rather than punish didn't just change Luis's life, it changed the company's culture, showing that trust, support, and opportunity are the real drivers of success. Ultimately, the greatest lesson is this: investing in people pays off. Everyone has a story, and sometimes all it takes is one person believing in that story to spark a transformation, not just in one life, but across an entire workplace. That's how change begins, one choice, one ripple at a time.